Everybody, Craig Shacklett here with Casino Marketing University. I'm CEO of TRIO360, and I've got two very special guests. This is our first actual panel interview, seminar, webinar, whatever we want to call it. So I've got two esteemed guests. I've got Az Husain, CEO of Casino Science, and Ben Koff, owner and principal of Hidden Upside. Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
It's good being here, Craig. Thank you.
So today, you guys are both experts, excuse me, experts in casino analytics. You have long backgrounds. You work with a lot of casinos, and so I was excited to, leverage your expertise and your experience today. And so I want to start high, and then we're going to drill down into more, tangible, practical advice. But at the start, I want to get into kind of background history of casino analytics, and I think there are a lot of parallels between one of my favorite movies, Moneyball, because
great movie.
I'm a huge Oakland A's fan.
Great
I
story.
Went to half the games. Yeah, I love that team, even though they always broke our heart at the end of the season. Great team. And for anybody not familiar with the movie Moneyball, it's about how the Oakland A's brought data analytics into baseball to buck all the conventional old school wisdom. And they really built a very successful baseball team on a budget that was just a fraction of what the Yankees and the Red Sox were spending. And again, it was based on them using analytics to unlock a lot of value in players. And now, obviously, fast forward 20 years, and every team has an analytics staff because you just can't go without it. And I think the casino industry is very similar in that not too long ago, analytical propeller heads were probably laughed out of the room with, it was run by kind of the old school, Vegas stereotypical guys. But now it's different, and every casino is leveraging data. So, Oz, why don't we start with you? Would you say the casino industry has kind of a Moneyball pivot point? And so, you want to share it with us?
Yeah, totally. It definitely has the Moneyball story, although it's probably not as compelling as the movie. But if you go back into the annals of gaming history, the idea of big data in casinos, it actually originated with the measurement of slot play. And it occurred actually in about the late 60s, early 70s. And as the folklore is told, Harrah's in Reno ran this premium promotion, this premium points promotion. And it was one of the industry's first player loyalty programs. And so what Harrah's did is the Harrah's employees, they would watch players wager on slot machines, and what they would do is they would issue these paper coupons for every $20 played. So these tickets then could be exchanged for prizes like toasters and transistor radios, and if you remember that, and TVs. And so if you think about this promotion, everything was kind of manually tracked here, and it was fraught with inaccuracies. There were these high administrative costs because you had to have all these people that actually would watch other people and how they would bet. So then we fast forward to 1983, and then the Golden Nugget in Las Vegas, they improved on this idea of premium points by installing these automatic ticket dispensers. And what they did is they installed them on their slot machines, and then for every $50 wagered, there was this ticket that was issued. So by automating the play measurement in this way, the Golden Nugget actually reduced the program costs, because now you don't need to invest in having all these people watch all these people play, and then also you don't need to, you actually get a lot better precision when it comes to measuring the player's worth. And this was actually developed by John Akers, who is actually the father of the modern player tracking system. But that is kind of the story of how, if you think about player tracking and how that actually was created, it actually came out of that.
It's like I think they're bringing it back now with the drink coupons in Vegas, right? Ben, you have anything to add to?
No, I think that was it's a good history, and I mean, when you look at the evolution of what has now happened from those simple beginnings, and where even these concepts that were strictly with slot machines, because it's easier to do with slot machines, right? It's a machine, you can count it. but even the industry that has come out of table games in trying to create that measurement as well in terms of player tracking, and bringing in more data with the Genesis Gamings of the world, and their competitors and all the other large manufacturers, bringing on these table game devices to try to get to that systemic, quantitative view of the player when it comes to tracking their play.
And it seems like every few years you hear about, oh, this is the breakthrough. Oh, we got chips in. We got sensors in the casino chips. Now pit bosses won't have to manually track it anymore. We got cameras that will see the bets. But it's still, I mean, that part hasn't changed, right? It's still just pit bosses going around and tracking people's ratings.
Well, from an operations standpoint, I think that you kind of hit on the key thing, is that there is a human element regardless, and that even goes with the slot machines, is that when we start looking at data, you really got to look at the building blocks of where do these player ratings coming from and where are we tracking them from? From a slot machine, it's only as good as the slot file and how well the game was set up and if it was set up correctly. And there have been several times when machines have been set up incorrectly. They're the ones you always hear about, the jackpot that was not meant to happen for $20 million at some small casino. And then on the table game side, it's also as good as making sure that you get the rated play in the first place, because that's one of the keys is identifying the customer correctly and having that player account set up. But understanding is the system working in the first place? Are the inputs good? So often we look at the typical, when you look at the pencils, the people who are taking like the rating cards, and when you look at kind of that whole level, it really hasn't changed a lot. It all comes down to those basic equations of, how much money are you gambling with, your average bet or your coin in, whatever way you want to look at it, and then the hold of the machine or the hold of the game to kind of get to that theoretical revenue. And then on top of that, tracking the play to see, what was actually lost. Much easier with slot machines. But if any of those are missed, your data can kind of just go to wayside. So while everything is nice and new and, to your point, RFID chips, the cameras that come down and photograph the stack of the chips and identify the colors, they're all wonderful. But the system still has to work and it has to be implemented flawlessly.
We talked about Oz. I love that story. I hadn't heard that before about the every $50 spit out a ticket.
Yeah.
Now, so if we keep going, so with those, I guess the players would just collect the little vouchers and then turn them in for some kind of prizes.
Yep.
Is that?
Yeah, that was the idea. If you actually fast forward maybe about a decade from the premium points concept from Golden Nugget, with the Golden Nugget folks, when they just they revved on that more, and you go forward probably about 10 years, you actually get to Harrah's, and Harrah's was probably at that time was probably the leader in big data and big data analytics, and they introduced this concept called total rewards. And this was really the first real loyalty program in gaming that used track play to incentivize player loyalty. And that program ultimately became the gold standard that other player loyalty programs would copy. And the rise in carded play changed the way in which casinos actually looked at their players. It changed the way in which they looked at preferences of players. It changed the way in which casinos would look at spending habits, because now suddenly you had players who could be identified. You had players that could be segmented. You had players that you could suddenly evaluate their worth, and then ultimately out of that, you actually had incentives that could be offered to these players at a much greater level of precision, because now you're able to actually track all that play. You actually see what they're worth, and you actually give them a reward that's commensurate with their worth to the casino. So the total rewards loyalty program, that really sealed Harrah's reputation as this innovative pioneer in big data for marketers well before that term big data had even been coined. The term big data was coined probably in about 2009, 2010. This was like the end of the 90s, and Harrah's was doing this.
Now, Ben, I know you came in as a president's associate, right? With
yes, yes. I spent 8 years with Caesars. I was recruited out of business school, right, brand new to the industry. Actually, almost 15 years ago today.
Right, and I know you were a UCLA MBA, which is amazing, top 10 program. So I think everybody was getting recruited. Now, was it that, and when you were getting recruited, was it that that reputation that Harrah's, was it still Harrah's or was it Caesars?
It was Harrah's at the time, yeah. So it's actually interesting. I mean, my story was I came up through the entertainment business. So I came up through television, broadcast, and worked in network while I was in LA. And it's funny, I didn't go actually for the big data stuff. I kind of fell into that afterwards. I actually went because I was looking for an environment that was kind of fun, where people were enjoying themselves, where it was exciting every single day. And I found that in the hospitality industry from the casino side. And it just turns out, I mean, really, when you look at our entire industry, it really is just a combination of customer service and math. Really, when it comes down to it, that's the yin and yang. And then, whatever level of quality and money you want to reinvest can determine everything else, and how you want to go about it. But it is always some combination of the two. And, it's interesting because, as you got to learn more, you got to, and especially since I've moved into other companies and seen more of the business, I took for granted a lot of that data infrastructure that just being spoken about that big data infrastructure before its time, because no one had it. People are still trying to chase what Harrah's at the time and now Caesars had 15 years ago, 20 years ago. And I've been with companies that when you realize that it's wonderful, and I think that speaks to the proliferation you see of all these marketing leaders and data leaders from Caesars kind of proliferating the industry, kind of spreading out to all corners of North America and the world. It's because of that background and that data first approach. I think that helps you look at things a lot more reasonably, because when all is said and done, they're publicly traded companies. They look at the bottom line. People look at their financials, and you can very easily explain quantifiable metrics. And before that, there were a lot of casinos that just relied on the same old. It's what was the gut that was there, but it wasn't the hard data that was reinforcing those gut decisions or helping you drive those gut decisions.
So I remember when I was in B school, and I was in B school at across the way from this guy.
USC, yes, I saw
USC.
that.
So
another great institution.
At UCLA, certainly I'm a big fan of Bruins when they can pull it off.
Wow, I can't believe this. We got Bruins and Trojans getting along.
Thank you for the backhanded compliment, but go ahead.
When I was in B school, there was this very famous case that Ben probably did as well on Harrah's, and Harrah's they were really forward thinking when it came to the use of analytics, and I didn't actually appreciate it when I was in B school until I actually joined Microsoft. I was at Microsoft for about 10 years. And the primary product group that I spent most of my time was SQL Server, which is the enterprise database product, which is in about 95% of most casinos across the United States. And we actually did an executive briefing with Harrah's, because Harrah's was interested in some of our new database technology. And actually, they were educating us, because they were talking about some of the things that they had implemented, especially around player tracking, and the amount of data that they collected, not only from the machines, but from all these different devices across the entire property. And we were just floored, because here we were thinking that we were such experts in data, and the reality was actually Harrah's was schooling us.
Going back to the Moneyball analogy, obviously baseball is probably the most statistical friendly sport there is. But the thing was, a lot of the teams were just focused on batting average, right? And that was on the offensive side, and then ERA on the pitching side. And what Moneyball was that the A's kind of unlocked on base percentage, for example. Like, look at that instead of just batting average. Now, it sounds like in the casino, there's even one more step where some casinos weren't even looking at stats. Harrah's was the first one to actually do it. And then obviously once you have all the data in one place, it's all right, what are the key metrics to look at? Excuse me. So what were some of the key metrics that kind of were discovered early on, like, oh wow, theoretical, for example. And then what are some new ones maybe that came after those initial breakthroughs?
Yeah, I'd probably say the biggest breakthrough here was the calculation for average daily theoretical, or ADT. ADT represents the average win per day for a customer, and it's calculated by taking the theoretical win a player generates over several days of play and then averaging the results. And this was a fundamental breakthrough when it came to evaluating the worth of a player, because now you would have a way to quantitatively assign value to a player based on the spend and the trip volume. And ADT, it just permeates the entire industry. It's something that we use almost exclusively. There are some people that will say that there are some weaknesses now with ADT, and people are looking for other types of measurements of ADT, because the challenge with ADT is that it looks at a player within a specific block of time, within a specific time dimension. And so it doesn't take into account the overall worth or the lifetime value of a player, because you might have players that are in locals markets who will potentially play over the course of an entire year. So what is their overall theoretical worth to the property? But if you look at it at just this very narrow lens of, let's say, a 30-day ADT or a 60-day ADT or a 90-day ADT, you're taking just a very time slice view of the worth of a player. And so ADT, it has been transformative for the industry, but now there are some challenges in the way in which the ADT is sometimes looked at, especially when you look at it in locals or regional markets.
Yeah, along those lines, I think that one of the challenges, and I should say that every way of incorporating the data makes incremental progress in the way that you can do it. We can always refine the numbers, and I think that at some point we're constantly always debating the numbers. Mm-hmm. No one has figured out that magic metric, and with ADT, I think it's great for slots. And why I say that is because fundamentally, a slot machine, there is outside of you can be an advantage video poker player maybe in slot machines, but at the same time, your hold percentage will always be finite just by the way of the game mechanics of video poker. You're always going to be locked into a certain hold at the highest level, even if you play perfect strategy. And same thing with slot machines. Over the course of that lifetime of that machine, it's always going to have a hold. There's no skill involved necessarily, and I'll ignore the social and skill-based gaming that is just such a small fraction of the slot business in the country and the world. But when you get to things like table games, where there is a whole bunch of volatility, what's nice about slot machines is that it's a very steady incremental pace. You can still be whaling away at a high average bet, but even if it's $10, $20 a spin, you're still doing a substantial amount of spins. It's not those one-offs necessarily for the high frequent players. Table games is a little bit different, where you have a lot of volatility. You have that, and calculating that volatility, where you really do have to take into account loss. And it's interesting because when you think about the concept, that evolution from ADT to ADW, where now people use average daily worth, which was also a Caesar's construct, a Harrah's construct, where and what's funny is I remember being on a panel and asking a group of, it was on direct mail, and we were talking about how we value our guests. And there's 100 people in the audience. And I said, does anybody know where 40% comes from in terms of ADW? I said, who uses 40% for that worth calculation? Do you use ADT or 40% of your average daily actual, what you average use? And pretty much almost 3/4 of the room raised their hand saying, well, I use 40%. And then I said, why? Where does it come from? And there was only one person who actually knew the answer, and that was the VP of data science for Caesars, who had actually been tasked with verifying it. 20 years later, did this metric still work? And it does. And where it comes from, it's essentially the estimated value that you're going to get that loss again. So if you look at someone who just, let's ignore theoretical, and they come in and they lose $1,000. The likelihood that person's going to come back is 40%, where they're going to lose that amount again. That's really where it comes from. And it's a nice It's a nice number. It's actually funny that so many places use 400 as their VIP threshold for ADW because that means $1,000 loss. Kind of works nicely in there. So what's interesting though, you didn't know that story, Craig, coming from Caesars, did you?
I did not. No.
Yeah, because you never really think about where these numbers come from, and I think that's actually kind of comes down to the crux of this discussion and what we're talking about today. Is it's great that you have all these metrics, but it comes down to why are you using them in the first place? And you kind of touched on that as when you looked at baseball, on base percentage versus batting average. It's a perfect example. Why do we use actual? And is 40%, for instance, in ADW the right term? And are there examples of people with extreme loss or extreme win? That's a perfect example of ADT that has always boggled my mind and has had to be corrected. Is that, let's say someone walks into your place, doesn't have a card, and beats you for $20,000. You're going to have somebody who has a 0 ADT. They're not going to be worth anything theoretical. If you look at their loss, they're actually into you for 20 grand. You're into them for 20 grand. And at that moment, if you were to do any of the calculations, probably at the majority of casinos in our industry, no one would actually reach out to them because they'd be worth 0 from a data standpoint. And because at the highest, if you're using an average daily worth, 0 is going to be it because it'd be negative with the ADA. And what's so funny about that is that's exactly the player that we want, right? Somebody who took our money. We know they have $20,000 available to them in discretionary funds at that moment. Yet there's a lot of places that won't send them a mailer, won't talk to them, call them from a host, won't even let them in their hotel to try and win back the money. And what's crazy about that is, in all likelihood, you're going to win back that money for whatever you invest into them because they've already won the 20 grand. So lightning's very rarely to strike twice. So didn't mean to go off kind of on a tangent in there, but it's one of those interesting things where sometimes while the data sounds all great, if you don't look at the practicalities of the data, like the Moneyball example, you're going to come out with there's opportunity to always be better.
I mean, I love that example. So as a marketing leader, how do you get around it when the data, the algorithm is saying, nope, do not invite back, 0 ADT? How do you make sure to get them back in?
You change the algorithm. I mean, that's the easy. I mean, that sounds much easier, but it's also training people. And during my time at Caesars, I think that was the biggest example I had, is that pedigree should not supersede experience. They can absolutely go hand in hand, and I think we see that all the time. And I think you're seeing that swing back in the industry right now. Is that everybody's hiring to your term propeller heads. And I will tell you that I'm glad I had the opportunity, but going back to my, how I started in Caesars, they had me work in every single position in uniform, front lines for the first year and a half. So here I was, newly minted MBA, working in valet in a hailstorm in Joliet, Illinois for 2 straight weeks on swing shift. And that's what I did. At night, I would, over the weekends, I'd put on a suit and suit up and walk the floor and do analytics. But until you actually get to experience and understand what's going through the player's mind and the person's mind, you're never going to get that kind of ability to look past the numbers sometimes.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Ben is saying. Like, you should never just blindly follow an algorithm. You should never just blindly assume that the numbers are correct. There's a story, there's a narrative that's coming out of the data. You should understand that, but domain expertise and understanding the vagaries of casino operations, that's incredibly important. And so you need to spend the time to marry the experience with the data.
And the player development team would normally be the ones that, actually, I shouldn't say normally. I'll leave that up to you guys. But is that a spot, Ben, that you would rely on for them to say, hey, listen, I know maybe the algorithm says this, but this guy is a player. He beat us this time. How do you give them the leash to maybe invest more than the algorithm would say to bring a player back in?
Well, I think that player development, I think, is kind of a unique beast in the fact that you're dealing with these algorithms that we're talking about work really, really well for 80, 90% of your base. They work for the grind business incredibly well because you're dealing with the masses. when you start looking at that player development side, there's so many calculations to take in. I mean, first and foremost, is that player going to come in if you didn't incent them in any way in the first place? You know, if you didn't give them a deal, if you didn't do that. Second of all is that the metrics don't necessarily bend in the way that they would for everybody else. And I'll use credit as one of my favorite examples of that with markers. And I remember in the past 5 years being at a property where the head of player development would tout how much in markers or available credit would be coming into the hotel that weekend. And while that's really, really nice, and it's definitely a metric, I'm not going to lie, and it's a great number, but what someone has in their bank account, their existing credit line, does not mean that you're a good player. It just means that at a certain point of time, you were able to get a level of credit, whether you're going to play with it and it doesn't mean you're going to play with it. It just means you have something. And the past is always, you know, my favorite line from one of our common colleagues, Cindy at Scarlet Pearl. You know, it's the Janet Jackson way of looking at the business is, you know, what have you done for me lately? And she'll sing that all day long, but it's very, very true, is that the recent past is indicative probably more closely of what the future is. And I don't know if there's anything you've kind of, I'm sure you've had other experiences with the data, with how you guys look at it. Yeah,
like the thing that I find kind of interesting sometimes, especially when you're talking about player development teams, is that it's something that algorithms, like, they don't do a really good job of, is trying to understand the intent of players. And I find that player development teams and host teams, they understand their players and the proclivities of their players really, really well, because they're having conversations with them. We've not gotten to the point in technology where we can actually automate any of those things. You still actually need to have a person there who's having conversations with players on a regular basis. And those conversations, those interactions, those are really, really important in order to get to that action that you want. That action that you want, you actually want an incremental trip. You want them to take one more trip so they can come out to the casino and they can play. And it's challenging to get an algorithm to do that, but it's much, much easier to get a host person to actually do that with a player.
Now, we're kind of touching on it, and this is a question before, I'll ask it. Can casinos ever go too far with data analytics and end up hurting themselves?
I've seen it firsthand, where people get so wrapped up in the numbers that they incent sometimes bad guests, or don't look at their numbers, what's going on, and stop incenting good ones. A perfect example is just the time period that was mentioned earlier on in that evaluation period. If you're not consistently checking your database, what happened recently, extreme losses, extreme wins, people no playing you, can get built into the average, and going into the behavior and intent sometimes gets lost if you're just purely looking at the numbers. You know, after the casinos opened up after the pandemic, what was interesting, and I'm seeing it again in some data sets, you have the people are so excited for all this money coming in that this is the time when people are coming in to scam the casinos. They're coming in to bring up that giant, you know, coin in, jack up that Theo, start getting the brand new coupons. Everybody's excited to welcome them because right now, like for instance, in Vegas, it's a money grab. And then what's going to happen is those people are just going to cash out everything, and you're going to have a negative ROI on them. So yeah, it's very easy to kind of miss that.
Yeah, I would agree, especially in the last 12 months of the pandemic. Like, I don't think anyone would have predicted that for a lot of casinos across the U.S. that they would be up significantly. But if you kind of think about it intuitively, it actually makes sense, because if you don't have optionality, you don't have anything to do except the casino is open, then you would naturally, you know, obviously casinos are going to do really well. And what you could actually assume is, like, the casino folks could potentially be looking at algorithms and saying, maybe we should be making tweaks here because we're going to have a change in player behavior. Now, if you follow that type of strategy, that again, you could miss some of the goodness that has been seen as a result of the pandemic.
You know, one thing I've seen that I think can backfire on casinos is, on the one, is making the analytics too transparent to players. And what I mean, one that comes to mind is limos. And I remember Caesars started saying, okay, we can pick you up, but it's a $70 folio charge. And, you know, obviously that analysts they've done a great job of shifting everything that players have to redeem reward credits, not go to the host and try to jockey with the host to get the biggest comp possible. I think that's smart in a lot of ways because it makes the host job easier. But I felt like that was something where it just turned off a lot of players, where it's like, hey, you're going to see this $70 limo charge in your bill. And they're like, really? So I don't know. I think, but on the other hand, like I said, the making all those comp decisions, or the vast majority of them, be like, hey, how many reward credits do you have? You know, that was good. So I don't know. Any thoughts on that, on transferring, like making transparent the comp system to the players?
I think it's important for players to understand the value that they're getting. So it's important for them to understand that, hey, we're giving you this, and this is the value that's associated with it. And if it's a comp and that comp value is like $50, if it's $100, they need to understand that, hey, we're valuing you as a guest who's patronizing our property, and this is what it's worth. Because then in the player's mind, they're going to attach that value to your brand and to your casino. And that's an important thing.
Along those lines, and I think you hit the nail on the head, it's when we look at what we do, why people come back to your casino, it's experiential. And there is a fine line, and I think that's kind of where the pendulum swings back and forth, and you see the differentiation in different corporate casino groups, is that difference between transactional reinvestment and, you know, experiential reinvestment. And to your point, a limo drive, the limo is a perfect example of that, right? When you see that person and you're coming off the plane and they're holding your name and they're picking you up in your limo, that's amazing. When they tell you it's $70 and it's coming out of your comps, it becomes that less amazing. Mm-hmm. And I think that intuitively, our guests know they're going to a casino, right? The casinos, you know, you didn't pay for all these buildings in the middle of the desert because it was even odds. The house always wins, right? These giant, you know, Vegas wouldn't exist if the house didn't win. I think our guests understand that. They understand they lose money. They do it for entertainment. And I think that in the back of the house, it's great to see, you know, when you're behind the curtain, yes, let the numbers run through. But I think at the same time, let guests know what they're worth. Give them, and that's why we have the loyalty programs. Give them a way to an aspirational goal that they know they earned. Have that transparency with how much coin in it goes in, or time on device. I mean, there's different ways to do it. And once they're there, give them the experiences, and that's really what it all comes down to, I think, in making them happy.
Well said. Yeah, and I think this is not really a question, but I've seen more and more cruises are starting to open up to all-inclusive instead of the billing thing, because people, when they're on a vacation, when they're having an experience, they don't want to think of, oh shoot, that just cost me $20. It just takes a little bit out of the enjoyment factor. And even if the all-inclusive ends up costing more than they would have at the same consumption level ad hoc, I think people just like that stress being removed. Like, whatever, I can enjoy everything on this trip. So it is a fine line casinos have to walk, because you do want to show, you know, hey, you're building towards something, but you also don't want to think like, oh, do I want to get this dessert with dinner because it's gonna, you know, cost me 30 reward credits. So, all right. So moving on, what are some of the newer breakthroughs you both are seeing in analytics? Ben, you want to go first?
I think the biggest move I think right now is that using, and I think it's more, there's a technology component to it, with people moving to the cloud to kind of do their data collection, and there are algorithms where you have vendors being able to help casinos do what normally would have had been done on their own servers, and they would have had to hire DBAs. Is that there's this ability now to access the algorithms and technology with a lot of vendors, you know, that wasn't available before. And with that, you have new tools and the ease of the tools. It's not someone who needs to go in there, code SQL, and then, you know, or find an Oracle DBA if you're one of those 5% of 10% of the casinos that instead are using, you know, a Konami product and are based on an Oracle infrastructure. But even then, it makes it easier to kind of get to that point of analyzing your data.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that a lot of the cloud infrastructures have really changed the way in which casinos, especially casinos that are located in more remote areas they don't have access to significant resources. They can take advantage of cloud-based technologies. I think that's a really big game changer for a lot of casinos, especially tribal casinos. I think a few years ago, a lot of tribes were a little bit apprehensive to make investments in cloud. And now that's actually started to shift. Actually, there are a lot more tribes that are actually feeling much more comfortable when it comes to making those investments in cloud infrastructure because they actually see the advantages of them. I also see that there are some more sophisticated data science and data science tools like machine learning and artificial intelligence that are actually going to gain some prominence in gaming over the course of the next several years. Machine learning is an interesting one. So machine learning is just the process of examining large amounts of data, and then what you do is you look for patterns that make predictions out of and you know, come up with some outcomes out of those predictions. And it essentially what it does is it gives a computer the ability to learn without actually explicitly having to program that pattern. And so, for example, you imagine if you're creating a capability to identify the probability that a player will respond to a promotion message. So when you're armed with that kind of information, you could focus your promotion message on those audiences that have the highest probability of conversion, or you could look at those low probability conversion players and then find cheaper methods. So maybe instead of direct mail, maybe you send them email or text messages instead. So I think there are these new types of computational techniques. Certainly machine learning is a really great example where casinos are going to have a lot of advantages in applying those to solve very novel problems in casino marketing. I think the other one is artificial intelligence or AI. AI is the application of these computational techniques where machines mimic some cognitive function that can be associated with the human mind. And the great thing about this is that AI can be used to solve problems that require some type of learned optimization that would be really difficult for a human to solve. So a good example of this in gaming is just imagine you're trying to optimize your slot floor and you're trying to find the best mix of machines and the best spatial arrangement of the machines on the floor, with that idea that you want to actually increase and get a greater take from the floor. So a slot manager could try using like heat maps. There's a lot of heat map solutions out there to look for opportunities to kind of reconfigure the floor. But if you're making a small number of like these very reactionary changes to the floor, the likelihood of generating a greater take from the floor or optimizing the entire floor, it's probably going to be a little bit less because there's just so many different changes that you can make, so many different combinations that you would actually really need a piece of software to do that. So an AI-driven approach would evaluate thousands and thousands and thousands of potential layout configurations and using months of gaming data and player behavior data to actually understand what is that fully profit maximized floor. So I see that like there are going to be applications of these technologies in very specialized areas, and slot floor is a really great example of that because again it would take you'll have thousands and thousands of different combinations, millions and millions of rows of gaming data. It's hard for a slot manager to do any of that work. You really do need to have software and like an AI-based solution to solve those types of problems.
When I was at Caesars near the end of my tenure, which is 2008, I remember they're kind of the holy grail they were trying to unlock was total property spend, because it was all the offers based on ADT, and then the example was, but what if you got one couple where the guy's a 1,000 ADT player but then there's another where there'd be both 100 ADT players, but one of them spending $2,000 at the spa, and the other one's going to the nightclub, and overall they're actually spending more. The smaller gamblers more valuable to the casino, and how do you target them and bring them in with offers when everything is just geared to ADT now? Has there been progress made towards that, or is that still kind of a pie in the sky goals? Have you seen that anywhere?
I think it depends on the focus of the casino and the casino group. Or I'm going to expound it, the hospitality group that has casinos. And why I say that is because I think there are already sub-industries, if you will, who have casinos who are already doing this. A cruise line's a perfect example of somewhere where they're looking at the all-encompassing spend, because it is a cruise ship first, and then it's everything that happens on that cruise ship. Casino just being a part of it, as drinks, art auctions, excursions. It really covers everything. I think that in some hotels look at it too. It's because they look at it as amenity. I think one of the challenges has always been the system of record being a gaming system. When you start off, and it's because it was easy, right? It was IGT Advantage. It was the Bally product, the ACSC, and these evolutions where it was gaming first. And when you make it gaming first, your tables, your infrastructure is all based on the gamer. And to your point, and it's so funny that we have this term in the casino industry, we call everything that's not gaming non-gaming, which is really like funny when you think about it. And I remember someone brought this up, at one point. It's the only industry where we talk about what someone doesn't do to describe, sometimes at some properties, half of what their spend is. Like, we don't talk about, a hotel is saying, oh, this is our non-lodging spend. No, it's F&B, it's spa, it's all these different things. But for some reason in gaming, we call it non-gaming. And that's that hubris. And I think that hits what it is. It's because for so long, and it's ingrained in the culture of us, that it's always gaming first, even when it's not. And I think that once you have people able from the tech side, from the marketing side, and it really needs to be coming from all aspects of the industry in your company, where you're looking at this holistic view, to your point, of loyalty, and we see people trying to do it. We see Caesars making those moves. We see MLife making those moves. We see a lot of others. I think you're going to see a proliferation of this. But until you create that infrastructure that is not solely gaming based, you will never be 100% there. High horse.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is like a little bit of hubris in it, and part of it is, I think, is for properties like, let's look at outside of commercial gaming in like Atlantic City or the Strip. It's partly because gaming represents such a large portion of revenue, and so anything when compared to revenue starts to the gaming revenue starts to become just like, oh, this is kind of like a rounding error. So I think that's maybe the reason why people look at it in that way. It's not like that when you're looking at commercial gaming in the large centers like Las Vegas. But I also think that there is this notion of like the panacea that we've all been waiting for, which is this: I want to have this 360 view of the player and what it is that they're spending in gaming, what it is that they're spending in F&B, what is it that they're spending in spa, what is it that they're spending in all these other non-gaming amenities, because not so much because you want to factor that revenue spend into like the overall worth of the player, but you're using that as a mechanism for understanding how can I get those players and understand those preferences so I can get them back to gaming, because that's the most important thing. And I do think that, the state of the art has advanced considerably over the course of the last several years. We're getting much better at actually starting to factor in all these other parts of the spend equation for players, and it's getting easier for marketers to understand what are all those different areas that players are spending in. So again, that they can affect the primary spend driver, which is on the gaming side.
That's a really good point, I think, and I missed that you have to, as a marketer, and it really comes down to marketing first. What is your business proposition? And to the point, you're right, local and regional properties are gaming forward and everything supports that. They're loss leaders. And they will make sometimes decisions, like buffet is a perfect example where everybody up before the pandemic thought they needed a buffet, which there were no buffets that made money. I've never seen a buffet P&L that made money. Now, if you ask them, it's like comp revenue, but they don't understand that. A lot of people don't understand that comp revenue is not real money. But I think that's right. In Las Vegas, it's one of the few places where you're looking at all that consolidated spend. And it really comes down to you have to decide what you want to be. Going back to your limo example, it's a no-brainer if you are there for the gaming to just send the limo out because you're bringing the gamer in and it's all about that money. Yeah. It makes sense in Vegas why you're charging somebody because it's another cost center that's trying to make revenue.
Gentlemen, this went even better than I hoped. You guys, I really appreciate your insights. I think you guys are both obviously experts in data analytics, but you come from different perspectives, and I really appreciate all of your input. So thank you for joining today.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Before I let you go, I'm sure people will want to follow up with you and pick your brain more. So Ben, how should people reach you?
The best way to reach me, just ben@hiddenupside is my email, or you can just find me on LinkedIn. Would love to chat because I love talking about this stuff, obviously.
Yeah, the best way to reach me is just hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm there, or you can reach me at oz@casinosci.com.
Perfect. Gentlemen, thank you again, and we'll have to do this. There's always breakthroughs, so we'll have to find an excuse to do this again soon.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Craig.